What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected and politically outspoken actors walks into what is expected to be a warm, friendly morning television interview, only to find himself confronted with the most aggressive and unexpected questioning of his entire career? That was the situation facing George Clooney on a morning that was supposed to be routine, predictable, and carefully managed. Clooney, a two-time Academy Award winner, humanitarian advocate, and longtime public figure, known for his composure under pressure, had agreed to appear on Lorraine, the popular ITV daytime program hosted by Lorraine Kelly. The appearance was scheduled as part of a broader promotional tour tied to his latest film project and ongoing humanitarian initiatives, causes he has consistently supported through public advocacy and philanthropic foundations. From Clooney's perspective, the booking seemed straightforward. He had appeared on the show before. Previous interviews had been marked by warmth, humor, and a relaxed conversational tone, exactly the sort of atmosphere that morning television prides itself on creating. Lorraine Kelly, known across the United Kingdom for her approachable style and friendly demeanor, had built her reputation on making celebrity guests feel comfortable and welcomed. There was every reason to expect another pleasant exchange filled with light banter, discussion of upcoming film releases, and perhaps a brief segment highlighting Clooney's international relief efforts. However, the mood inside the ITV studios in London felt subtly but unmistakably different that day. As Clooney arrived, impeccably dressed and accompanied by members of his publicity team, there were early signs that something was not unfolding according to the usual script. Crew members whispered quietly among themselves. Assistants moved briskly across the studio floor with an urgency that felt out of place for a standard celebrity segment. Even before the cameras began rolling, there was a tension in the air, an invisible but palpable current that suggested the interview might not proceed as smoothly as planned. When Clooney stepped onto the set, the difference became more apparent. Lorraine greeted him with her customary opening line, "George, lovely to see you again." Yet something about her expression seemed restrained, almost guarded. The familiar sparkle in her eyes was absent. Instead of the easy laughter that had characterized their previous interactions, there was a measured seriousness in her posture as she adjusted her notes. Viewers at home, tuning in with their morning coffee, likely sensed only a faint shift in tone at first, but those within the studio could feel the weight of it immediately. As the interview began, Lorraine hinted that this conversation would diverge from the norm. "I have to say, this interview might be a bit different from our usual chats," she remarked. Clooney, seasoned and media trained, responded with calm curiosity rather than defensiveness. "Different how?" he asked evenly. "I thought we were here to talk about the new film and the foundation work." His tone remained polite, professional, and composed, a reflection of decades spent navigating unpredictable interviews. Lorraine's reply marked the moment the atmosphere changed entirely. "Oh, we'll get to that," she said, her voice tightening ever so slightly. "But first, there are some questions that need answering. Questions your publicists have been avoiding for months." It was a statement that immediately reframed the segment from promotional interview to investigative confrontation. The implication was clear. This would not be a comfortable exchange. For viewers watching live across the UK, the shift was startling. Morning television is typically designed to offer gentle conversation, lifestyle features, and entertainment updates, not pointed accusations or confrontational interrogations. Yet here was one of Hollywood's most influential figures sitting across from a host whose tone suggested unfinished business. Social media began buzzing within minutes as audiences reacted in real time to what felt like a calculated pivot away from entertainment and toward controversy. Clooney's trademark smile faded, slightly, replaced by a more focused expression. "I'm not sure I understand," he said carefully. His words were measured, but his posture signaled alertness. He had walked onto the set expecting a platform to discuss creative work and humanitarian commitments. Instead, he appeared to be bracing for an unexpected line of questioning that neither he nor his team had anticipated. Behind the scenes, producers were likely weighing the implications of what was unfolding live on air. Confrontational interviews can generate ratings and viral moments, but they also carry risks, especially when involving a guest of Clooney's stature. As a globally recognized actor and advocate, he commands significant public goodwill. Any perception of unfair treatment could quickly backfire. At the same time, Lorraine's decision to press forward suggested a deliberate editorial choice, one perhaps intended to challenge rather than flatter. The tension in the studio deepened with each passing second. Clooney's public persona has long balanced charm with principled conviction. He has spoken openly about political issues, humanitarian crises, and media responsibility. Yet even someone accustomed to tough questions can be caught off guard when the context shifts without warning. The interview, once framed as a celebration of artistic and philanthropic achievement, was rapidly evolving into something more contentious and unpredictable. What made the moment so striking was not merely the content of the questions, though that would soon become a focal point, but the manner in which the tone transformed. There is an unspoken contract in promotional appearances. Both sides understand the purpose and parameters. When that balance shifts unexpectedly, it creates an atmosphere charged with uncertainty. Viewers, sensing authenticity in the discomfort, leaned in rather than tuning out. The discomfort itself became the story. As millions continued to watch, the exchange teetered on the edge between journalistic accountability and perceived ambush. Clooney remained outwardly composed, but the slight tightening of his jaw and the pause before his responses revealed the strain beneath the surface. Lorraine, for her part, appeared resolute, flipping through her notes as though determined to pursue a line of inquiry she believed warranted public discussion. In that suspended moment, between expectation and escalation, the interview stood poised to become more than a routine segment. It was evolving into a television event that would be replayed, analyzed, debated, and dissected across media platforms. What began as a simple promotional stop had transformed into a live test of composure, credibility, and control. And as Clooney sat there, facing a line of questioning he had not anticipated, one thing became unmistakably clear. This was no longer just another morning chat. It was the beginning of a confrontation that would challenge assumptions about celebrity, interviews, media ethics, and the fine line between accountability and ambush. The atmosphere in the studio, already tense from the unexpected shift in tone, grew even heavier as the exchange continued. What had begun as a polite but uneasy clarification now edged closer to open confrontation. George Clooney sat upright in his chair, his expression controlled but alert, aware that millions of viewers were watching every movement, every pause, every change in his tone. "What questions are you referring to?" he asked calmly, though there was now a firmness beneath his voice. It was not the casual curiosity of a guest engaging in light conversation. It was the careful, deliberate inquiry of someone trying to understand the nature of the challenge being presented to him. Across from him, Lorraine Kelly leaned forward slightly, her posture shifting from relaxed host to something more probing, almost prosecutorial. The warmth that typically defined her morning television persona seemed to have receded, replaced by a focused intensity. Her eyes did not leave Clooney's face as she spoke. "Let's start with your recent remarks about British journalism," she said, her tone measured but pointed. "You've been quite critical, haven't you, calling our press intrusive and suggesting it lacks the sophistication of American media." The words hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. The studio fell into a silence so complete that even the faint hum of production equipment seemed louder than usual. For viewers, at home, the shift was impossible to ignore. This was no longer a promotional chat about films and philanthropy. It had become an accusation. Clooney's eyebrows lifted in visible surprise. The reaction appeared genuine, not theatrical. He blinked once, processing the claim before responding. "Lorraine," he began carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've never said those things. I've always spoken positively about working in the UK and with British media." His response was composed, but the subtle tightening in his jaw betrayed the pressure building beneath the surface. As a seasoned actor and public figure, George Clooney had faced tough interviews before. He had navigated political debates, controversial film topics, and humanitarian discussions. But being confronted with what he believed to be fabricated or misrepresented quotes on live television presented a different kind of challenge. "Have you?" Lorraine pressed, not missing a beat. In a deliberate gesture, she lifted a stack of printed pages from the table beside her. The sound of the paper rustling echoed slightly through the studio microphones. "Because I have several quotes here suggesting otherwise. Would you like me to read them?" The studio audience shifted in their seats. A few exchanged glances. This was not the tone they associated with the show. Normally, interviews were punctuated by laughter, applause, or light-hearted anecdotes. Now, there was only discomfort. Some audience members leaned forward in anticipation. Others appeared uneasy, unsure whether they were witnessing journalism in action or a segment spiraling into confrontation. Clooney remained still for a moment, choosing his words with precision. "I'd be very interested in seeing those quotes," he said evenly, "because if they exist, they've either been taken out of context or completely fabricated." The word fabricated landed heavily. Lorraine's expression shifted subtly, her polite smile sharpening at the edges. Fabricated, she repeated, emphasizing the word. That's a serious claim, George. Are you saying respected British publications invent quotes? Her tone carried both challenge and incredulity, as though inviting him to either double down or retreat. The tension escalated. Further, in live broadcasting, such moments are unpredictable. There are no retakes, no edits to soften phrasing. Every statement becomes part of the public record in real time. Clooney exhaled slowly, visibly restraining frustration. I'm saying you should verify your sources, he replied, the calm in his voice thinning just slightly. I've never spoken negatively about British journalism as a whole. Individual outlets, maybe, when they've acted unethically. But that's not the same thing. It was a careful distinction. He acknowledged that he may have criticized specific behavior, perhaps invasive paparazzi practices or sensationalist reporting, but rejected the broader characterization that he had condemned British media entirely. His argument hinged on nuance, on separating systemic condemnation from targeted criticism. Lorraine, however, seemed intent on narrowing the focus. The pages in her hand suggested preparation, perhaps even determination to hold him accountable for words she believed he had spoken. Whether those quotes were accurately attributed, misinterpreted, or stripped of context remained unclear, but the optics were undeniable. A respected Hollywood figure being challenged on live British television about alleged criticism of the very media system hosting him. The studio's energy felt charged, almost electric. Even the production crew appeared unusually still, aware that the segment had drifted far from its original purpose. Clooney's posture remained upright, but the easy charm he was known for had given way to guarded precision. Lorraine's voice, once synonymous with morning warmth, now carried the cadence of cross-examination. For viewers at home, the exchange raised immediate questions. Had Clooney indeed made sweeping criticisms? Were the quotes accurate? Or was this an example of how public comments, once filtered through headlines and social media, can transform into something unrecognizable? As the seconds ticked by, the interview teetered between clarification and escalation. Both participants seemed aware of the stakes, not only personal reputations, but also the broader narrative about media responsibility and celebrity accountability. Clooney's insistence on context underscored the complexity of public statements in an era where a single line can be amplified without its surrounding explanation. In that moment, what stood out most was not just the content of the dispute, but the visible shift in demeanor from both sides. Clooney, typically relaxed and humorous, now appeared measured and defensive. Lorraine, typically affable and conversational, maintained a firm, almost prosecutorial stance. The friendly morning chat had transformed into a live debate about journalistic integrity, media interpretation, and the fine line between critique and condemnation. And as the confrontation unfolded, it became clear that this was no longer simply about a few disputed quotes. It was about perception, credibility, and control in the unforgiving spotlight of live television. The tension inside the studio had shifted from uncomfortable to explosive. What began as a strained exchange over disputed quotes had now escalated into something far more personal and volatile. The atmosphere felt charged, almost suffocating, as though the air itself had grown heavier with every passing second. Camera operators, trained to remain neutral observers, exchanged uncertain glances behind their equipment. One adjusted his focus unnecessarily, simply to avoid making eye contact with anyone else on set. Members of the production team stood, frozen along the edges of the studio floor, their headsets crackling with urgent whispers from the control room. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone to call for a commercial break. But that break never came. Lorraine Kelly, no longer projecting the warm morning show persona audiences associated with her, seized on a single word Clooney had used moments earlier. Unethically, she repeated, her voice sharp and deliberate, as though tasting the word before launching it back at him. And what do you know about ethics, George? There was no mistaking the hostility now. This from someone who built his career on charm and connections instead of talent. The reaction was immediate and audible. The studio audience gasped in unison. A few hands instinctively flew to mouths in disbelief. The insult was not subtle. It was direct, deeply personal, and delivered without hesitation. The transformation in George Clooney was instant. The easy smile that had defined his public image for decades disappeared completely. His posture stiffened, his jaw tightened. For the first time since the segment began, the polished composure that had carried him through countless interviews appeared visibly shaken. "Excuse me," he said quietly, but the quietness was not softness, it was controlled anger. "Did you just question my professional credibility on live television?" Across from him, Lorraine Kelly did not retreat. If anything, she leaned further into the confrontation. "I'm questioning many things," she replied. "Your talent, your sincerity, and your right to lecture anyone about media ethics when you've spent decades shaping the press to benefit your image." The accusation struck at the core of celebrity culture itself. The idea that stars carefully cultivate relationships with journalists, granting access when coverage is favorable and withdrawing when it is not. But to level such a charge so bluntly and in such a public setting was extraordinary. Clooney stood abruptly. The sudden movement sent his chair scraping loudly across the polished studio floor, the harsh sound echoing through the microphones. The physical act of standing marked a turning point. This was no longer a tense interview. It was a standoff. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, though his tone suggested he no longer believed that explanation himself. "This isn't an interview. It's an ambush. And frankly," he added, his voice steady, but edged with anger, "it's beneath both of us." For a split second, it seemed possible the confrontation might end there, that producers would cut to commercial, that someone would intervene. But Lorraine wasn't finished. She appeared resolute, almost energized by the escalation, as though she had anticipated this exact moment. "Sit down, George," she said firmly. "We're not finished. Not even close." The authority in her voice startled even those who knew her well. It carried not the casual guidance of a host steering conversation, but the command of someone determined to maintain control at all costs. The cameras continued broadcasting live across the United Kingdom. Millions of viewers watched, stunned, as one of Hollywood's most recognizable figures stood in open defiance on a daytime talk show set Social media feeds were already erupting in real time, but inside the studio, there was only silence, thick, uneasy silence. I said, "Sit down," Lorraine repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You came here to promote your little film and your precious foundation. First, you're going to answer some real questions. The phrasing, your little film, your precious foundation, carried unmistakable mockery. It dismissed not only his career, but also his humanitarian efforts, which had been central to the original purpose of his appearance. Clooney remained standing, one hand gripping the back of his chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. "Real questions?" he shot back. "What's real about this attack? You've ambushed me with fake quotes and personal insults. This isn't journalism, Lorraine. It's character assassination." "Character assassination?" Lorraine repeated, and then she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's interesting coming from someone who's spent his career destroying the character of anyone who criticizes him." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "Tell me, George," she continued, her gaze unflinching, "how many journalists have you had blacklisted?" The word blacklisted seemed to shock even Clooney. "Blacklisted?" His voice rose slightly now, disbelief overtaking restraint. "What are you talking about? I've never blacklisted anyone. This is ridiculous. What is this really about?" Behind the scenes, production assistants whispered frantically into their headsets. Directors in the control room debated whether to cut the feed, but doing so mid-confrontation could create even greater controversy. The broadcast had taken on a surreal quality, like a scripted drama unfolding in real time, except there was no script, no rehearsal, no safety net. "This is about accountability," Lorraine fired back, rising from her own chair so that they now stood facing each other across the small studio table. "This is about a privileged Hollywood elite who comes into our country, uses our media when it benefits him, and then speaks badly about us behind our backs." The confrontation had shifted from personal to national. It was no longer merely about disputed quotes. It had become framed as a broader cultural conflict: celebrity influence versus journalistic independence, foreign star versus domestic press. Clooney's voice steadied again, though anger still flickered beneath the surface. "I have never spoken badly about British media or this country," he said firmly. "I own a home here." The statement was both factual and symbolic, a reminder of his connection to the UK, his investment in its communities, and his long-standing presence in its cultural life. But in that moment, facts seemed secondary to emotion. The studio audience remained completely silent. No applause, no murmurs, just stunned stillness as they witnessed what felt like the collapse of the unspoken rules governing daytime television. What had been marketed as a friendly promotional appearance had spiraled into a raw, public clash over ethics, privilege, reputation, and power. And as both figures stood their ground, neither willing to concede, the sense grew that this was no longer simply an uncomfortable interview. It was a moment that would be replayed, debated, and dissected long after the cameras finally stopped rolling.